Have you ever felt like you were so close to reaching your dreams just to have them ripped away?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, today we're going to dive into a story that takes that feeling to a whole other level.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
We're going back to 15th century England to uncover the life of Eleanor Cobham.
Oh, okay.
This woman goes from being a simple knight's daughter all the way to the Duchess of Gloucester, just one heartbeat away from the English throne.
Wow, that's quite a jump.
It is, but it's not a fairy tale.
Oh, no.
It's a story of ambition and betrayal, and even accusations of witchcraft.
Witchcraft in the 15th century, that's serious stuff.
It really is, and it all led to her downfall.
This is going to be fascinating.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And to help us untangle this captivating story, we'll be using the Noble Blood podcast episode. It's called Eleanor Cobham, Necromancer Witch.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we'll piece together her journey and see how she navigated court life, all the drama, and the forces that brought her down.
It's amazing how much superstition and political intrigue played a part in history back then.
Oh yeah, this story really takes us into a time when even whispers of magic could destroy you.
Really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So to really understand Eleanor's story, we have to start at the beginning, with her early life. It's pretty remarkable she became the Duchess of Gloucester in the first place.
I mean, starting as a lady in waiting, that's quite the climb.
Yeah, and that's actually where she meets Humphrey, the Duke of Gloucester.
Yeah, so the Duke of Gloucester, he was King Henry V's brother, right?
And when Henry V died, Humphrey became super powerful, being the uncle and protector of the young King Henry VI.
Exactly. Marrying Humphrey catapulted Eleanor into a whole new world.
Imagine going from lady-in-waiting to a duchess living in a palace. Talk about a life change.
Right. And the Noble Blood episode really paints this vivid picture of her life at Greenwich Palace.
I bet feasts, luxurious gifts, probably even from the young king himself.
Oh, definitely. And a place among the most elite in England. She was living the life of luxury. But this wasn't some straightforward love story, was it? Humphrey was already married when he met Eleanor.
That's right. His first wife, Jacqueline, Countess of Hainaut, she was no pushover either. She had claims to territories in France.
Ah, so their marriage was more of a power move, a political strategy.
Exactly. Now, while Humphrey is off in France, trying to secure Jacqueline's land and all that, he brings Eleanor back to England with him.
Okay, so not your typical love triangle.
Definitely not. And to make matters even more complicated, the Pope ends up declaring Humphrey's marriage to Jacqueline invalid.
Wow, so now he's free to marry Eleanor, but what a scandal that must have caused.
You can say that again.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people saw Eleanor as, the other woman, even though things were obviously pretty messy to begin with. And public opinion was a big deal back then. There's even a record of a bunch of women petitioning Parliament criticizing Humphrey for ditching Jacqueline.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's like a medieval PR nightmare.
Pretty much. But Humphrey was determined, and he marries Eleanor in 1428. I can't even imagine the rumors swirling around court at that time.
From knight's daughter to Duchess of Gloucester, it's like a Cinderella story, but with a lot more baggage.
Totally. And this is where we start to see the seeds of Eleanor's downfall being planted. This wasn't just a love affair. It was a political play with major consequences.
So you've got Eleanor living this luxurious life as Duchess, but things are changing.
Big time. By 1441, Humphrey's not looking so secure anymore. His rival, Cardinal Beaufort, he's gaining power. And Humphrey's stance on the 100 Years' War, not winning him any popularity contests.
Oh, this doesn't sound good. So with Humphrey weakening, his enemy saw a chance to strike. And who better to target than his wife, right?
Exactly. And that's when the rumors start flying. Whispers throughout the court that Eleanor's been talking to astrologers, and even worse, necromancers.
Necromancers.
Yeah.
So like communicating with the dead. In the 15th century, that's a serious accusation.
Deadly serious. The accusation was that she was trying to predict, maybe even control, the young king's death.
We have to remember, back then, belief in magic and the occult was everywhere. To be accused of necromancy, that was a huge blow to your reputation.
It was. And this wasn't just gossip. It had the potential to destroy her, especially with the possibility of her becoming queen.
This whole thing is sounding more and more dangerous for Eleanor.
Yeah, and things escalate quickly from there. 3 men close to Eleanor, her personal clerk, a canon, and her chaplain, they're arrested.
Arrested? For what?
Sorcery and treason. Specifically, plotting to kill the king. One of the men, Roger Bolingbroke, actually claimed Eleanor hired them to use necromancy to figure out when the king would die.
Now, hold on. We've got to think about the politics here. Humphrey's enemies had every reason to make up these accusations.
Right, or at least twist the truth to their advantage.
Exactly. Eleanor became their weapon against Humphrey.
And talk about bad timing. The Noble Blood episode describes this scene. Eleanor is having dinner at the King's Head in Cheapside when she gets news of the arrests.
Oh no, I bet she knew she was next.
She did. She took off right away, running to Westminster Abbey for sanctuary.
Seeking sanctuary, that was a big deal back then, wasn't it? It meant she knew how serious these accusations were.
Oh yeah, even if she wasn't guilty of treason, just the suspicion of witchcraft could ruin her. Sanctuary was a last-ditch effort for protection in time.
So there she is, hiding in Westminster Abbey. But sanctuary couldn't last forever. What happens to Eleanor next?
Well, that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
Westminster Abbey, it was a safe haven for a while, but it couldn't protect her forever. Back then, people accused of crimes against the crown would often seek sanctuary there.
It's kind of like a legal waiting room, right? You're safe for the moment, but your fate is still up in the air.
Exactly. You get a little breathing room, but you still have to face the music eventually. So, how did things play out for Eleanor? Did she actually have to stand trial?
Oh, she did. They eventually took her into custody and put her on trial in a church court. The charges: plotting to kill the king and practicing witchcraft. The stakes were unbelievably high.
It's interesting. The source material mentions that there wasn't a clear process for trying someone like Eleanor, a peer of the realm, for these types of crimes. It's like they didn't know what to do with a woman of her standing.
It sounds like the system was struggling to wrap its head around a woman like Eleanor wielding that much influence, let alone possibly messing with witchcraft.
That's a good point. It really shows you the expectations and norms surrounding women back then. But they did figure out a way to go ahead with the trial, and Eleanor had to defend herself against these serious charges.
So what was her defense? Did she claim she was innocent?
Her approach was, well, unexpected. She completely denied any involvement in necromancy or plotting against the king, but she admitted to using love potions and seeking help from magic to have a child.
Wait, what? That's quite a confession. Why would she admit to that while still denying the bigger accusations?
It really makes you think. Was it a strategy to minimize the damage, maybe thinking a smaller offense would be easier to deal with? Or did she actually believe those potions and charms worked? It gives us a look into the mindset of someone living in a time where the line between superstition and reality was blurry.
It also shows how limited the options were for women back then, especially when it came to things like having children or their relationships with powerful men. Maybe turning to a love potion seemed like a solution when faced with infertility or a lack of affection from her husband.
Exactly. We can't forget the societal context and the limitations placed on women when we're looking at their actions. However, even by admitting to this lighter form of magic, Eleanor was playing a risky game.
Because it made her seem more susceptible to the occult, like she was capable of even darker things.
Right. It gave her accusers more fuel, allowing them to portray her as someone easily influenced by dark forces.
So did admitting to those things help her case at all? Was she given a lighter sentence?
Sadly, no. While she avoided execution, they decided to make an example out of her. Her punishment involved a very public humiliation. They made her walk through the streets of London in black, carrying candles, as a way of showing repentance.
Oh, that's awful. A far cry from her earlier days when she would parade through London in all her finery and power. What a fall from grace.
It was a deliberate spectacle, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the rules or those in power. Can you imagine being in that crowd, watching this once powerful woman be brought down like that? It sends shivers down your spine just thinking about it.
And it didn't stop there, did it? What happened after this public shaming? Did she just disappear?
Unfortunately, no. After that, she was imprisoned for over a decade. They moved her from one castle to another, and she eventually died in confinement. The woman who was almost queen ended up a prisoner, forgotten by the very court she used to command. It's a tragic ending to a story that started with so much hope and ambition.
It really is a tragic ending. It makes you think if she ever looked back and thought about the choices she made, and if they led her to that fate. Do you think she ever believed she was innocent? Or maybe regretted her ambitions?
Well, it's impossible to know for sure what was going through her mind all those years she was imprisoned, but it definitely makes you think about ambition, especially for women in a society that told them what they could and couldn't do.
Earlier you mentioned the historical records about Eleanor's case. They don't all agree.
Yeah.
So is there any way to know if she was really guilty of treason or was she just a pawn for her husband's enemies?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? We're basically looking at pieces of a puzzle and trying to make sense of it all. I mean, maybe she dabbled in astrology or looked for magic to solve her problems, which wasn't so unusual back then. But whether she actually planned against the king, that's something historians still debate.
The Noble Blood episode compares Eleanor to Lady Macbeth, both driven by ambition and maybe using dark methods to get what they want. Do you think that comparison fits?
I think it's an interesting comparison. It shows how fascinated people are by powerful women who break the rules. It asks the question, are these women master manipulators, or are they just trying to find their own way in a world controlled by men?
A question that still resonates today, huh? Even centuries later. How much control did women like Eleanor really have over their own lives? Were they calling the shots, or just pieces being moved around by men?
That's a big part of why Eleanor's story is still so interesting. It's got ambition, betrayal, the pull and danger of magic, and ultimately what it costs to be powerful in a world where women weren't supposed to have power.
There's this one interesting detail before we wrap things up. Apparently, while Eleanor was locked up, rumors went around that her and her astrologers predicted the king would die that summer. The young king got freaked out and talked to his own astrologers to be sure he was safe.
Oh yeah, that's a bit ironic, isn't it? It shows how powerful prophecies and superstitions were, even when they didn't come true. And it reminds us that history is often told from the winner's point of view, the ones who are left standing after the fight for power.
It makes you think, right? How much fear and manipulation went into creating the stories of the past? Who benefits from making certain people look like villains, and whose voices get silenced along the way?
That's a really important question to ask ourselves whenever we're looking back at history. It means we need to really look at the sources, consider different viewpoints, and challenge the stories we've been told about the past.
And speaking of stories, there's one last twist to Eleanor's story that I found super interesting. Shakespeare himself included her in one of his plays, even though he changed some things about her character.
Yeah, she's in Henry VI, Part 2. Shakespeare makes her out to be ambitious and hungry for power, and her actions lead to her downfall. It's fascinating to see how her story got reimagined centuries later to explore themes of ambition, witchcraft, and what happens when women defy expectations.
It seems like her story never really went away, even in fictional form. It still shapes how we see this crazy period in English history.
Definitely. Eleanor's story is both a warning and a symbol of what women faced when they tried to grab power in a time when they weren't supposed to have any.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Eleanor Cobham's life, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
Well, I hope our listeners remember that history isn't just dates and battles. It's about the lives of real people, each with their own desires, mistakes, and goals. Eleanor Cobham, with all her ambition and the things she was accused of, she was a product of her time, shaped by the same forces that influence us today.
It's a good reminder to approach history with an open mind and a critical eye, to question what we're told, and to understand the social and political backdrop that shaped people's lives.
It also reminds us that chasing power, whether it's the 15th century or the 21st, can be dangerous. It's full of ambition, betrayal, and outcomes you never intended.
Our deep dive has only scratched the surface of Eleanor Cobham's story. We hope you'll keep digging into the historical accounts, look at things from different angles, and come to your own conclusions about this mysterious woman. You never know. You might discover something that challenges what we think we know and shines a new light on this fascinating time in history. And if you enjoyed this journey to the past, make sure you subscribe to The Deep Dive for more incredible explorations of history, mystery, and the human experience.